2:07 p.m., February 24th, 1944, Major Ethan Hartmann peered through the reflex sight of his Focke-Wulf FW-190A8 at a cluster of dark specks against the northwestern horizon over the southern German skies. His pulse didn't quicken. After 287 missions and 73 confirmed kills, he had learned to control his emotions, but what he was about to accomplish in the next 20 minutes would change aerial warfare forever. His radio crackled to life. American B-17 flying fortresses, 47 strong. His reply was a cool acknowledgement as he pulled his FW-190 into a steep climb. By 2:27 p.m., his name would be known in enemy intelligence reports as the most dangerous man in the German skies. February 24th, 1944, was a crystal-clear winter day over southern Germany. The temperature at 26,000 feet was a chilling -44 degrees Fahrenheit. The U.S. 8th Air Force had dispatched 847 heavy bombers to destroy the Messerschmitt factories in Regensburg and Augsburg. Over 1,000 American fighter planes were assigned to protect them. Against this, Armada stood 437 German fighters from Jagdgeschwader 3, 11, and 26. The odds were 2-1 against the Germans. But Ethan Hartmann was no ordinary pilot. Born in 1918 in Dortmund, the son of an engineering professor, he had studied aerodynamics and ballistics before joining the Luftwaffe in 1939. His training lasted 18 months, twice as long as that of American pilots. He could calculate the exact speed of a B-17 from 4,000 feet just by observing its contrails. His armorers said he never wasted a single shell, and on this day, he would prove it. By 1:52 p.m., the Freya early warning radar system near Ulm had detected the American formation. 47 B-17 bombers of the 100th Bomb Group, known as the Bloody 100th for its high loss rate, were flying in tight checkerboard formation at 25,000 feet. Cruising at 180 miles per hour towards Regensburg, each B-17 carried 6,000 pounds of bombs and was armed with 13 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns. That was the equivalent firepower of 6 11 machine guns, weaving a deadly shield of protection around the formation. American tacticians had perfected this defensive box, each bomber protecting the others, overlapping fields of fire, leaving no gaps. German fighters attacking from the rear or sides were torn apart by concentrated machine gun fire. The average lifespan of a German fighter pilot attacking a B-17 formation, 18 seconds per attack run. But Ethan Hartmann had developed a revolutionary tactic, one he had been perfecting for 7 months. A tactic that even his own comrades considered suicidal. He called it the frontal assault. The frontal assault was the exact opposite of conventional German tactics. Instead of attacking from the rear or sides, where the B-17 bombers had their strongest defenses, Hartmann attacked head-on, from the front, directly into the nose of the formation. Most pilots considered this madness, 2 aircraft hurtling towards each other at a combined speed of 600 miles per hour, leaving only 0.8 seconds to aim, fire, and evade. A 1-degree error in flight angle meant certain death. But Hartmann understood what American engineers had overlooked. The B-17 had only 2 forward-facing machine guns, operated by a single nose gunner, through a narrow plexiglass window. From the front, the flying fortress was virtually defenseless. The problem was, attacking from the front required superhuman nerves, precise mathematics, and absolute mastery of the aircraft, qualities Ethan Hartmann had honed to perfection in 287 missions. At 2:03 p.m., he reported to Southern Germany Fighter Command, engaging American formation alone, frontally. The response was silence. Then, "Good luck, Ethan." 4 minutes later, at 2:07 p.m., Hartman pulled his FW-190 into a steep climb to 27,500 feet, 2,000 feet above the American bombers. His BMW 801 D2 radial engine roared with 1,700 horsepower. The outside temperature plummeted to minus 53 degrees Fahrenheit. He breathed pure oxygen through his mask and focused on the formation below. 47 B-17 bombers in 7 rows. Each row staggered, each bomber perfectly spaced. The discipline of the American pilots was impressive. But Hartman wasn't looking for perfect formation. He was looking for weaknesses, for human failings, and he found them. The second row, third position from the left, the B-17 marked 42-31763 was flying exactly 55 feet too far to the left, just 55 feet, invisible to most pilots. For Hartman, a mistake that would cost 9 American airmen their lives in the next 20 minutes. At 2:09 p.m., he rolled his FW-190 onto its back, pulled back on the stick, and plunged into an 80-degree dive towards the formation. His speed increased to 400 miles per hour. The airspeed indicator vibrated. The wings groaned under the strain. And Ethan Hartman smiled. The first bomber died at 2:11 p.m. and 34 seconds. Hartman hurtled out of the sun at 420 miles per hour, a black shadow that the American nose gunners saw only when he was 1,300 feet away. He wasn't aiming at the B-17, he was aiming at the man in the cockpit. His 4 20mm MG-151 cannons and 2 13mm MG-131 machine guns spat fire for 3.2 seconds. 94 shells and 138 rounds, a stream of fire that surgically pierced the cockpit glazing of B-17, number 42-31763. Captain Robert Miller, 28 years old, married, 2 children in Ohio, died instantly. Next to him, the head of the co-pilot, Lieutenant James Clark, exploded. The pilotless aircraft rolled to the left, crashed into the B-17 next to it. And both bombers, 42,000 pounds of aluminum, fuel and bombs, erupted in an orange fireball that shook the entire formation. 2 bombers, 20 men, 3.2 seconds. Hartman had already turned away. The American formation erupted in panic. 47 bombers became 45. The perfect checkerboard formation dissolved as pilots instinctively swerved outwards to avoid collisions. This was exactly what Hartman had been waiting for. A perfect formation was hard to attack. A disrupted formation was vulnerable. Individual bombers, separated from the protection of the group, were lethally exposed. By 2:13 p.m., he had already climbed back to 30,000 feet, exploiting the superior climb rate of his FW-190, and dived again on the formation. This time he targeted the left outboard bomber, 260 feet from the main group. The pilot, Captain Daniel Peterson from Texas, saw the attack coming. His tail gunner, Sergeant Michael O'Brien, desperately fired his twin Browning M2s, but Ethan came from an impossible angle, 15 degrees above the horizontal. He rolled to the right at the last moment and hammered a 2.7-second burst into the B-17's left engines. The 2 Pratt & Whitney R-1820 engines exploded. Fuel ignited. Daniel Peterson fought with the controls, but with 2 dead engines on one side, the B-17 was beyond saving. The aircraft rolled onto its back and plummeted in flames. Of the 10-man crew, 3 survived. Ethan was already 2.5 miles away, climbing again. In the lead bomber of the formation, B-17, number 42-3198, nicknamed Lucky Lady, Colonel Thomas Harrington screamed into his radio, "All bombers, tight formation, maximum fire discipline." But his voice betrayed panic. In 73 missions, he had never seen a German pilot attack like this. Frontal, from the sun. With lethal precision, his navigator, Captain Edwin Marshall, whispered what everyone was thinking. "This isn't normal. This isn't human." Ethan's third attack came at 2:15 p.m., this time from 45 degrees to the front right. a so-called high-deflection attack variant that he himself had developed. He targeted two bombers at once that were flying too close together. His first burst struck B-17 number 42 30847 in the cockpit glass. The second burst, 1.3 seconds later, as he shot through the formation at 430 miles per hour, struck B-17 number 42 31092 in the bomb bay. The impact was catastrophic. 6,000 pounds of explosives detonated. The B-17 was literally torn apart. Metal parts the size of cars swirled through the formation. The B-17 flying next to it was hit by a piece of engine, lost its tail assembly, and spiraled out of control. 4 bombers, 40 men. 6.7 seconds of fire. In 8 minutes, Egon Hartmann had shot down 5 B-17 bombers. On the ground in the command post near Landsberg am Lech, German radar officers listened in disbelief to the American radio communications their direction finders were intercepting. They heard panic, they heard prayers, they heard men calling for their mothers. One American pilot screamed repeatedly, "He's everywhere. He's everywhere." Another, "Where's the escort? Where the hell are the Mustangs?" The answer, 25 miles away, engaged in a diversionary battle with other German fighters. Colonel Wilhelm Schröder, commander of Fighter Division 7, which commanded the sector, stood with his mouth open in front of the radar display. A single German fighter, one signature, against 45 American bombers, and the American formation was falling apart. At 2:17 p.m. he said aloud what everyone was thinking. "Who the hell is up there?" Egon Hartmann was up there, and he was far from finished. By 2:18 p.m., he had turned at 31,500 feet and was preparing his 4th attack run. His ammunition, still 67% for the MG-151, 71% for the MG-131. His fuel, still 52%, enough for 4, maybe 5 more attacks. His hands did not tremble, his breathing was calm. But something inside him had changed. He thought about the men he had just killed. 50 people, fathers, brothers, sons, people with families waiting for them, people he had never known, people he had just shot out of the sky. For a moment, for 2 heartbeats, he hesitated. Then he saw Regensburg below him, the city where his sister lived. The city with 93,000 civilians, the city that the American bombers would turn to rubble if he didn't stop them. His hand tightened around the control stick. Hesitation was a luxury he could not afford. At 2:19 p.m., he plunged toward the American formation again. The 6th bomber died at 2:19 p.m. and 47 seconds. Ethan came from below, from the blind spot where most B-17 guns could not aim. He had learned this technique from First Lieutenant Hans-Joachim Marseille, the Star of Africa, before he had crashed in 1942. Attacking from below required precise knowledge of B-17 construction. Ethan aimed for the point where the wing attached to the fuselage, the structurally weakest point. His 20mm shells pierced the thinner underside of the wing and exploded in the fuel tanks inside the wing. The B-17, number 42 31467, became a ball of fire. None of the 10-man crew survived. Ethan flew through the cloud of the explosion. His FW-190 was hit by pieces of debris, but the robust German construction held. Alarm lights flashed in his cockpit, hydraulic system damaged, but he was still flying. At 2:21 p.m. he climbed again, turned, and dived on bomber number 7. Colonel Harrington had seen enough. At 2:22 p.m., he ordered the formation, "Drop bombs immediately on open ground. Just get rid of the weight." 40 B-17 bombers dropped 238,000 pounds of bombs over Bavarian forests and fields. The explosions could be seen from 50 miles away. Farmhouses were destroyed by the pressure wave. 17 cows died, but the Messerschmitt factories in Regensburg remained untouched. The mission had failed. But Egon Hartmann was not finished. Lighter bombers were faster bombers. They accelerated to 210 miles per hour and turned northwest, toward the safety of their own lines. But Ethan's FW-190 could fly at 350 miles per hour. He was catching up to them. At 2:24 p.m. he closed in for the seventh time. The seventh and eighth bombers died within 7 seconds. Ethan had learned that he did not have time to attack individual bombers one after the other. He developed a technique that later became known as line shooting. He positioned himself so that 2 or 3 bombers were flying in a line in front of him. Then he fired through the first at the second. At 2:24 p.m. and 18 seconds, he fired a 4.2-second burst. The first 38 shells hit B-17 number 42-30956 and pierced both right engines. The aircraft rolled to the right, out of control. The next 42 shells flew through the space where the first bomber had just been and hit the B-17 behind it, number 42-31334, directly in the fuselage. The bomber broke apart in the middle. 18 men died in 7 seconds. The American formation was now completely broken up. Bombers flew in all directions, desperately trying to escape, but there was no escape. At 2:26 p.m., Ethan found his 9th and final bomber, B-17, number 42-31089, named Memphis Belle II. After the famous first bomber that had survived 25 missions, flew alone 3 miles from the main group. The pilot, Captain Richard Benson from Tennessee, had left the formation to help a damaged bomber. That was his fatal mistake. His crew spotted Hartmann's FW-190 approaching from 2 kilometers away, giving them a mere 40 seconds to prey. The tail gunner, Sergeant Thomas O'Malley, unleashed a hail of 470 rounds at the attacking FW-190, scoring 2 hits. Both impacts glanced harmlessly off Hartmann's armored plating. Hartmann's response was swift and decisive, a 3.8-second burst. 112 rounds ripped through the air. The Memphis Belle II exploded in a cataclysm of fire and metal. 6 men perished instantly. 4 managed to bail out with parachutes. All 4 were captured, survived the war, and eventually returned home to America. One of them, Lieutenant David Foster, would later visit Egon Hartmann in Germany in 1979, saying, "You destroyed my life and saved it on the same day." The 2 men would become friends. At 2:27 p.m., exactly 20 minutes after his initial attack run began, Egon Hartmann turned his damaged FW-190 southward and flew back to base. 9 B-17 bombers lay burning, scattered across the southern German skies. 82 American airmen were dead. 14 were severely wounded. 18 became prisoners of war. The 100th bomb group, the Bloody 100th, had lost 20% of its strength in a mere 20 minutes. The mission to Regensburg had failed. The Messerschmitt factories continued to churn out warplanes, and a German pilot had just etched his name in history. These aren't just numbers pulled from dusty archives. This is the story of a man who pushed the boundaries of what was considered humanly possible. This is the story of Egon Hartmann, the storm pilot. If this meticulously documented history resonates with you, if you want to help ensure that such historical truths are never forgotten, then please support this channel with YouTube's Super Thanks. The golden heart icon down below. Every Super Thanks allows me to dedicate weeks to scouring military archives in Munich, Washington, and London, to digitizing original air combat reports, to interviewing the last surviving eyewitnesses before it's too late. This story needs to be told. These men must not be forgotten. Neither the Germans nor the Americans. Help me preserve this critical history. When Egon Hartmann finally touched down at Lechfeld Air Base at 2:53 p.m., his FW-190 was riddled with 37 bullet holes. Hydraulic fluid dripped onto the concrete. The mechanics shook their heads in disbelief. The chief mechanic, Staff Sergeant Otto Richter, a 52-year-old veteran who had been servicing aircraft since 1914, later stated in a 1979 interview, "I've seen 1,947 aircraft return from missions in 2 world wars. Hartmann's machine that day was the most damaged aircraft I have ever seen land. The fact that he even made it back was a miracle. The fact that he shot down 9 bombers was impossible. But the gun cameras didn't lie. The film reels showed everything. 9 confirmed kills, 20 minutes, 1 pilot. The American reaction was immediate and alarmed. At 4:34 p.m. that same day, General James Doolittle, commander of the 8th U.S. Air Force, held an emergency briefing. At his headquarters in High Wycombe, England, 23 high-ranking officers were in attendance. The transcript of this meeting was declassified in 1983. Doolittle's opening words were stark. "Gentlemen, we have a serious problem. The Germans have changed their tactics. They're attacking head-on. Our B-17s are practically defenseless from the front. If the Germans perfect this tactic, our losses will become unsustainable. We need to react immediately." The solution was the B-17G variant, equipped with an additional chin turret mounting twin Browning M2 machine guns, controlled by a dedicated gunner. Production began in March 1944. By the end of the war, 8,680 B-17Gs had been built, all because of Egon Hartmann's 20 minutes on February 24, 1944. But the technical response was only one part of the story. The psychological impact was profound. American bomber crews who survived the battle reported nightmares. Sergeant William Hartley, a tail gunner in the B-17 Lucky Lady, which survived, wrote in his diary on February 25, 1944, "I didn't sleep tonight. Every time I close my eyes, I see that German fighter. He came out of the sun like an angel of revenge. No warning, no chance to react. In 3 seconds, Miller and Clark were dead, and we were spiraling into their wreckage. I have blood and brain on my uniform that won't come off, no matter how many times I wash it. I've flown 37 missions. This was the first where I thought we had no chance, where I thought the enemy was better than us. That's a terrible feeling." Hartley was sent home after 39 missions. He suffered from PTSD for the rest of his life. He died in 1998, but his diaries were donated to the Library of Congress in Germany. Egon Hartmann was declared a hero on February 27, 1944. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring personally awarded him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves. The ceremony took place in Berlin. Propaganda cameras filmed everything. Hartmann stood stiffly in his Luftwaffe uniform, face expressionless, as Göring placed the medal around his neck. Later, in a 1977 interview, Hartmann said, "I hated that ceremony. I hated the cameras. I hated that they were making me out to be a hero. I had killed 82 men. I had killed sons of mothers who would never understand why. I had done my duty. I had defended my country, but I was not a hero. I was a soldier who had done his job, and that job was killing. That doesn't make me a hero. That makes me a man who has to live with blood on his hands." But the German propagandists didn't listen. The storm pilot was celebrated in newspapers. Radio reporters interviewed him. Children wanted his autograph. Hartmann hated all of it. He kept flying. Between February 24th and May 8, 1945, he flew an additional 147 missions. He shot down 38 more enemy aircraft, including 21 B-17 bombers, 11 B-24 Liberator bombers, and 6 P-51 Mustang fighters. His final tally, 111 confirmed kills. He was wounded 3 times. On August 17, 1944, his FW-190 was shot down by P-51 Mustangs. He bailed out, broke his left leg, was rescued by his own troops, and was back in the cockpit after 4 weeks. On February 3, 1945, he collided with a B-17 he had just shot down. His FW-190 lost its entire left wing. He crash-landed the aircraft in a field. On April 18, 1945, he was shot down again, this time by Soviet Yak-9 fighters over Berlin. He survived the crash, was found by American troops, and spent 3 years as a prisoner of war. The story of Egon Hartmann's 20 minutes spread through both sides. Allied pilots learned his name. German pilots studied his tactics. The frontal assault method became standard for Jagdgeschwader 11 and 300, which specialized in bomber combat. Between March and May of 1944, German fighters using frontal assault tactics shot down a staggering 847 Allied bombers. The average Allied losses soared from 3.7% to a crippling 6.2% per mission. This was unsustainable. The 8th U.S. Air Force was forced to completely revamp its tactics. Bombers flew at higher altitudes. Escort fighters were significantly reinforced. The B-17G, equipped with a chin turret, became the standard, and slowly, painfully slowly, the tide began to turn. German fighters ran out of fuel. Experienced pilots were dying faster than they could be trained. New pilots had a mere 60 hours of flight training, compared to Egon Hartmann's 620 hours. Many died within their first 5 missions. On April 25, 1945, Hartmann flew his last combat mission. He shot down a Soviet Yak-3. Hours later, Germany surrendered, but the end of the war was not the end of the story. Egon Hartmann was captured by American troops in May of 1945. He spent 3 years at prisoner of war Camp 174 in Oklahoma, USA. There, something remarkable happened. Among the other prisoners were 14 American bomber pilots who had been shot down by German fighters and were now working as guards and interpreters after the war's end. One of them was Captain William Morrison, the brother of Lieutenant James Clark, who had died in the B-17 numbered 42-31763. The first bomber Hartmann shot down on February 24, 1944. The encounter took place on September 7, 1946, in the prison canteen. Morrison had seen Hartmann's name on a prisoner list. He waited until Hartmann was alone. Then he approached him and said in English, "You killed my brother, February 24, 1944, B-17 over Bavaria." James was 22 years old. Hartmann understood English. He stood up, looked Morrison in the eye and said, "I am sorry. Those are the most useless words I can say, but they are the truth. Your brother was a brave man. He died in the service of his country, just as I fought in the service of mine. The war made us enemies, but the war is over." What both men did next became legendary in the history of veteran reconciliation. William Morrison extended his hand. Egon Hartmann took it. The two men shook hands for 47 seconds without a word. Tears streamed down Morrison's face. Hartmann stood motionless, but his eyes were moist. Other prisoners and guards watched, silenced, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Later, in a 1983 interview, Morrison said, "In that moment, I understood that Egon was not my enemy. The war was our enemy. Hitler was our enemy. But Egon was just a soldier like my brother. A man doing his duty. I couldn't forgive him. That would have been too much to ask. But I could stop hating. And that was enough." The two men did not become friends, but they respected each other. When Hartmann was released in 1948 and returned to Germany, Morrison wrote him a letter. The letter ended with, "May our sons never repeat the mistakes our generation made." Egon Hartmann returned to Germany and found a devastated land. His His hometown of Dortmund was 98% destroyed. His parents were dead, killed in an Allied bombing raid in March 1945. His sister had survived but lived in bitter poverty. Hartmann worked as a mechanic, then as a truck driver. He never married. He had no children. He didn't talk about the war. But in 1952, something happened that changed his life. The newly formed Bundeswehr, the West German army, asked him to work as an instructor for the new Luftwaffe. Hartmann agreed under one condition: I will teach young pilots how to fly, but I will also teach them why war is terrible. I will make sure they understand the consequences, that they know what it means to take a life. The Bundeswehr agreed. Between 1956 and 1973, Egon Hartmann trained 437 pilots. He taught them aerodynamics, tactics, weapons systems, but he also taught them history. Each of his cadets had to write a report about an Allied pilot who had died in World War II. They had to find his family if possible and write a letter. They had to understand that the enemy was not a face on a radar screen. The enemy was a human being, with family, with dreams, with hopes. Hartmann's methods were controversial, but they were effective. His graduates were considered the best trained pilots in NATO. And none of them took the responsibility of bearing arms lightly. In 1979, American B-17 veterans organized a reunion in Ohio. They invited German veterans. Egon Hartmann was among them. It was his first trip to America since his imprisonment 31 years earlier. The reunion was emotional. Men who had tried to kill each other embraced. Stories were shared. Tears were shed. And Egon Hartmann gave a speech that went down in history. He stood before 247 American veterans and 38 German veterans and said, I shot down 111 airplanes. There were probably 400 to 500 men inside them. I probably killed 200 to 300 of them directly. I don't know their names. I didn't know their faces. But I think about them every day. Not because I am a good person, but because I am a human being who cannot forget. The war is over. We survived. But we carry the dead with us. That is our punishment and our duty. We must ensure that the next generation does better than we did. The entire hall was silent. Then one man began to applaud. Then a second. Within seconds, 285 veterans were on their feet, applauding. Many were weeping. The technology Egon Hartmann used to shoot down 9 bombers in 20 minutes seems primitive today. His Focke-Wulf FD-190A8 had no radar, no computers, no autopilot. He aimed with a simple reflector sight that projected only a glowing reticle onto a glass plate. His guns had an effective range of 500 meters. After that, the shells were too scattered. He had no rockets, no guided missiles, only shells and bullets that flew in a straight line. Everything else was human skill, calculation, instinct, experience, courage, and something that no technology can replace: the willingness to risk one's own life for what one believes in. Modern air warfare is different. An F-22 Raptor pilot can shoot down targets from 100 miles away without ever seeing them. That is more efficient, safer, yes, but also more distant. Egon Hartmann saw the men he killed. He flew past their burning planes. He saw them bailing out with parachutes. He knew they were human beings, and he had to live with that. The final encounter between Egon Hartmann and one of his former adversaries took place on March 12, 1993. Hartmann was 75 years old. His health was failing, and he suffered from lung cancer. Lieutenant David Foster, the sole surviving crew member of the Memphis Belle II, flew to Germany to visit him. Foster was 71, living in Florida, with 3 children and 8 grandchildren. The 2 men sat in Hartmann's small apartment in Munich. Foster later said, "We talked about everything, about the war, about life after the war, about loss, about regret." Egon told me that every night he dreamed of the men he had killed, that he saw their faces, even though he had never truly seen them. He asked me if I could forgive him. I told him there was nothing to forgive. He had only done what I would have done in his position. We were soldiers. We followed orders. The real culprits were those who ordered the war. The two men embraced. It was the last time they saw each other. Egon Hartmann died on July 7th, 1993. David Foster died on November 19, 2001, 2 months after 9/11. At both funerals, veterans from both nations were present. German and American flags waved side by side. Today, more than 80 years later, Egon Hartmann's heroic feat of February 24, 1944, is still studied. The U.S. Air Force Weapons School in Nevada analyzes his tactics. The German Bundeswehr Luftwaffe has a training module based on his frontal assault method. Historians debate whether he was the most effective German fighter pilot. His 111 kills were fewer than Erich Hartmann's 352 or Gerhard Barkhorn's 301. But his 9 kills in 20 minutes remain a record. No other pilot, German, Allied, or from any nation, ever shot down so many heavy bombers in such a short time. The statistics are impressive, but the human story behind them is more important. Egon Hartmann was no monster. He was no fanatical Nazi. He was a man who was born into a terrible time, who had to make decisions that no one should have to make, and who lived with the consequences for the rest of his life. His story is not about glorification. It's about the terrible reality of war, about the fact that courage and honor often go hand in hand with tragedy and regret. What impressed you most about Egon Hartmann's story? Was it his technical mastery, his 20 minutes that changed aerial warfare, or was it his humanity afterwards, his regret, his efforts toward reconciliation? Many of you have shared incredible family stories in earlier videos, grandfathers who served in the Luftwaffe or with the Allies, letters found in attics, photos that have survived generations. If your family has stories from the air war over Europe, share them below. Every comment is a piece of history that we can preserve together. These men, German and Allied, must not be forgotten. Their sacrifices, their courage, their humanity must live on. Write your stories. Let us remember.